Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please feel free to say hello to our artists, say hello to our staff if you recognize us. I can't, I'm in the wrong view to see who's been bold enough to join with their video on. Oh, not too many brave people tonight. Oh, hi, Barbara.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Jeremy. The reason why I'm not on video right now, I'm not afraid of being on video. I'm just driving, and I didn't want to miss anything. Okay.
Well, so Jeremy, thank you for joining us from your car.
Yeah, that's what's going on. So as soon as I get fixed into the fixed location, I'm gonna have my handsome face available for you all.
Amazing.
We'll definitely be keeping an eye out now.
Is there an artist you're here to see in particular?
Yes, I'm here to see Pam.
Great.
All right.
Pam, you got a fan.
What's up, Pam?
I'm so glad to see you.
Oh, I got your email. I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna respond. I'm gonna be there. So I'm here.
Thank you.
Amazing.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for showing up. We love it. And hello, everyone else. Welcome to our virtual reception. I hope you're all having a wonderful summer. It's a beautiful foggy day today in San Francisco. And Catherine, are you zooming in from your home?
Yes, in San Francisco. I'm in Ingleside, so I'm like in the fog belt too.
Oh, yeah. I'm downtown and it's classic fog. So
at least you get to see the sun more than we do.
Yeah, just a little bit. For those that are in the Mission District, they definitely get that belt of sun because of the hills blocking the fog, and I am so envious. I want to welcome everyone to ArtSpan's Art in Neighborhoods Artist Reception, celebrating the works of Pamela Axelson, Catherine Gutierrez, and Wendy Robushi. They are currently exhibiting at District Supervisor Ahsha Safai's office in City Hall until October 25th. Now, a little introduction to our Art in Neighborhoods program for those who aren't familiar. It was initiated in 2018 with the intention of facilitating spontaneous artful discoveries by locals and tourists alike. These venues are not your typical white wall galleries or museums, but places we tend to frequent as busy urbanites, which includes cafes, restaurants, activity sites, hotels, and community centers. With the goal of bolstering our artist community with exposure and potential art sales, this program also intends to bring influx of business to the participating venues. As when you are aligned with ArtSpan, you are aligned with our community-driven mission to keep the arts alive in San Francisco. Before we begin our presentation, I want to remind our viewers that SF Open Studios is right around the corner. This year, we are presenting a month-long festival filled with artful events around the Bay Area from September 16th to October 17th. Our grand Open Studios exhibition will take place from October 21st to November 21st at the Somarts Cultural Center. There will be in-person and virtual events to increase our flexibility this year. You may visit the link in the chat to learn more. As I mentioned before, Pamela, Catherine, and Wendy's art is up at Ahsha Safai's office until October 25th. An appointment is required to see the works in person. The office manager, Sam, is eager to show the art to anyone that's willing to come in and maybe be hosted by the artist, or if you're willing to go and by yourself, then you may make an appointment with him. So please email him to set up a viewing. And you can also view the works from the comfort of your home. You may visit our dedicated online virtual gallery. Okay, we're going to move on to our first artist, Pamela Axelson. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. We're happy to have you with us tonight. Pamela is a mixed media artist that has worked with a variety of media like marble, bronze, watercolor, ink, and many others. So Pam, what are some of the more unconventional or non-fine art materials you have used in the past?
Well, I think my career actually started, or when I was about 18, I started, and I still do this when I need to, is I started digging holes. And so I spent a lot of time creating space in the earth. And then I moved on to using dirt in a different way on canvas. And then at a point, I started collecting different colors of earth around the Bay Area. And I was layering them into bags on my studio out of Pier 3, which isn't there anymore. Yeah. But and I was making sedimentary forms, and I built, and then I created a press to press them, and I thought that I was sort of mimicking geologic events that time. And then over the years, I've experimented with different papers. This drawing that you can see right now, well, most of the drawings that I'm doing right now are on Gampi paper, it's a Japanese rice paper, and it's non-absorbent, and I'm using a water-based material. So it's really interesting how it takes up the ink and the ink wash. And the other thing that I've used too is it's called gold beater skin. It's a form of intestine. And I've used that as a drawing material, and it definitely presents some challenges. And so it's taken me a while to figure out how to work with the Gampi paper, and I'm still working on the gold beater skin. The intestine is very different, the way it takes up the ink and the wash.
That is fascinating. I am so glad I asked that question, because dirt and intestines are definitely unconventional art materials.
I think at the point I was adding kelp and shrimp skins and things to my sedimentary forms out there on Pier 3 too. So it was kind of smelly in my studio.
Oh, I love it. Have you learned any lessons when you incorporate a new medium into your practice?
Yeah, every time there's a new medium, you have to figure out how to make it work. And back to the layered forms, I realized that I needed to somehow mimic the compression far away from the actual pressure that anything that happens in the earth. But with this Gampi paper, it has taken me quite a long time to figure out how. It's a very fragile paper. It's super thin, and so it took me a number of years to figure out how to make it more durable and stable. And at first I was using, rabbit skin glue, it's a furniture glue, and you have to mix it and boil it. And as it turned out, as some of the early pieces, it gets very brittle over time. And so that I decided wasn't working. And then I spoke with a friend who lives in New York, and he suggested I look at some bookbinding adhesives, and that's what I use now. And it's great, and it's perfect, and now they're much more stable. And then there's the whole process of taking a big sheet of this very thin paper and adhering it to a piece of silk, which if I just took the whole piece of paper, I would have a wad of whatever was left of the drawing on the paper. So I do have to cut them up. And the process of reassembling them is really intense, actually, because I intend, this goes to your question about mistakes, but I intend to put the drawing back together as it was made, and the paper slips around on the adhesive a little bit. So it's that period of the work. It has a lot of intensity about trying to get it right, and mistakes happen, and I work with them. Sometimes they add, a different texture to the drawing, things like that. So
great, thank you. Yeah, I do notice that it's segmented in this photo, this piece here, and that's where you had to cut and kind of reassemble like a puzzle piece.
Yeah. And I haven't, at this point, I've never decided to just randomly reassemble them, because I still like them as they are, but that's an option in the future. But yeah, so it's a grid. I put a grid on there. I use different things for the grid. This is the one I'm working on right now. I use colored pencil. So it's a dark blue colored pencil. And they're multi-layered is the other important part. So I have to lay out the first layer and adhere it to the silk organza. And then I come back once that's all settled, and I add the second, sometimes a third layer. and it gets, the grids are slightly different. So you'll see how they, you know, they don't completely from one drawing, from one layer to the next, they don't completely line up. So, but that's fine too. That's fine.
Yeah.
So people always ask, they're a little, there's 1A, the across the top it would be 1A, B, C, D, etc. And then the second one is 2. And you'll see it, people always say, what are the numbers and the letters about? They always, when they come to the studio, what's happening here. Yeah, and that's what it is.
Great. In what ways have your memories of landscapes informed your work?
Okay, so that was an interesting question for me, actually, when I read it. So I lived mostly in the West as a kid, and my family traveled back and forth between Colorado, Nebraska, LA, San Francisco, and we lived in Idaho, Montana. So we went actually through the state of Utah a lot, and the landforms there have always been a big influence. The mountains in Colorado have been a big influence on me. And then I lived, as an adult, I lived in New Jersey, New York for about 8 years. And what really had an impact on me there was when the trees lose their leaves in the fall, and you have these beautiful barren branches and stalks. And there, I would, you know, as I moved around in New Jersey, I would see these landscapes of a very linear form, and that have influenced my sculpture in a lot of ways. No, they influenced a lot of drawings I did in the 80s, but you're not probably seeing that in these drawings. And right now I take a lot of photographs of just the branching patterns of trees. I don't directly work from photography. I take these photographs of tree branching just because I'm interested in that. And it's kind of like a, you know, storing information that I am not currently really using. I mean, there definitely are branching patterns, not so much in the drawing that's on the screen now, but in some of the drawings, there's a lot of linear stuff going on across the page. And it references roads, rivers, you know, and as I'm doing it, I sort of think those things go through my mind. But these are pretty randomly done drawings. You know, I start in a place and then I add things, and then at a certain point, the drawing itself just takes over and kind of dictates what I have to do next.
Great, I love that. I love intuition-based artwork, and it's so great that you can incorporate, I'm sure you incorporate your current feelings and emotions into your work, and it really shows there's something within these two works. It's slightly disturbing, but energetic, and I like the play of that, and it's very, very, there's details that are really nice, and really fine line work that I really appreciate. So thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Pam?
What is the medium again for this painting, Pam?
Okay, so the paper, Jeremy, is a really fine, smooth. The next time I see you, I'll try to show you a piece. But or if you come to Open Studios, that would be a great time too. But it's a really smooth. It has a little bit of sheen to it. It's a Japanese rice paper. And then the rest of what you see on the one that's on the screen now is either ink, not ink wash, but ink, you know, India ink. I have various black inks that I use, and it's mostly black inks. And you can see some blue in there because some of the black inks bleed out other color. And I'm either using a brush to apply the ink, or sometimes I have a couple different kinds of pens that I use. There's a really fine rollerball pen made by this company, Tombow. I use that one. And then there's another one that there are different kinds of nibs, tips, so you can get a broader, wider line. And the white that you see in this is an acrylic, white acrylic pen. And that's pretty much it, yeah. And then there's silk. The paper, I back it on this, just a pretty transparent silk organza. And if you hang these up in front of a window or a glass, you know, so the light can go through, they're fairly transparent. So they look, if the drawing actually looks a little bit different when you have it in front of a window or so light can pass through.
Jeremy, do you have any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay.
Hi, now I can see
Oh,
you.
wow.
Can't see myself.
Welcome.
Got house.
We
Great.
do have a few more questions in the chat. Oh, hi, Jeremy. It's great to see you.
Well,
Sorry, I'm just catching up here. So Pam, Jason asks, how much time in preparation of materials versus how much time in the actualization of a piece?
That's an interesting question. The pieces take time. I mean, I'd say one of these pieces, I mean, over the last 20 years or so, I've been working on this group of pieces, and they would take a while because I was working full time at the Department of Public Health, and so I had about maybe 10, 15 hours a week to work at my studio. So one of these drawings could take several months then. And now that I'm full time at my studio again, I'd say they can take about a month, because in between periods of drawing, I have to let it sit until it speaks back to me and tells me what to do. And then once the first layer is done, I move on to the second layer, and I don't have a guide for the second layer either, except that somehow it'll work with the other one. Don't have that. I don't figure it out. So execution in terms of drawing it can be pretty intense. Like I can work 2 or 3 hours at a time on one and then not work on it again for a few days. And I might work on a different one at the same time. So does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, I believe so.
It seems like it. And I did see one more question, which was from KBB. How long do these take for you to complete?
Well, they can, there are some that are very big, that are 6 by 6 feet, and those probably can take, 5 to 6 months. Hopefully not, but there have been a couple that have. And the sort of about half that size might take a couple of months. I think a couple of months is where I am now. And I have much more time to work on them, so they're moving along more quickly than they were for a while.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Pam. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and your work and your inspiration and whatnot. And I do apologize again for the intrusion. This is all about you and your work. And I hope that we have no more unwanted visitors.
Me too. And thanks for the questions. Really good questions, everybody. Jeremy and Jason. So, and the last person. So thank you.
Thank you for the questions. All right, so we're gonna move on to our second artist, Catherine Gutierrez. Hi, Catherine, how's it going?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for being with us tonight. Catherine is an oil painter with a practice rooted in expressive compositions depicting otherworldly landscapes. So Catherine, do you work from any specific influences like photographs of space or sunsets?
I would definitely say yes. What ends up happening is that I kind of search the internet or I experience amazing sunsets and I remember them. So a lot of times when I start my work, I don't start from a photo, especially with these larger pieces. I just go, and then it's the colors in my mind that then come out onto the canvas. I just paint as I go, and more, I guess you could say, intuitive, because I'm pulling from a Rolodex of memories of looking at a lot of sunsets. And, if I'm, say, looking at Instagram and I like this one particular color, then I'll try to incorporate that color. Very cool. Organic.
Yeah, I love it. Like I said earlier, intuition-based work, it really feeds my fancy, and playfulness that you have. I see lots of there's some nice brush strokes, there's a splatter, and then there's beautiful ombre, a crescendo of color. coming out of that focal point on the right side. It's a really, yeah, this is very beautiful. What is your process when you are starting a large painting?
Like I said, it's blank. And so I usually pick about maybe 2 to 3 colors and I throw it. Like a lot of times it's being thrown on the canvas on the ground, so that I can then use paper towels or brushes, or I pretty much try to use almost anything to then mix it myself and then start subtracting. Like I like trying to incorporate a lot of textures in there and layering. So I usually start with 3 and then that has to dry. So I'm working in oil. I thin down the oil to be almost like a watercolor consistency. And as I'm working it, I'm layering it so that I'm using what watercolor or what oil paint is best for, which is its depth and its saturation of color, which I love. And start, and usually it's the painting that's informing me of what I'm painting. It's everything is an experiment for me every time I step into the studio, and I don't hold on to an outcome. As long as my outcome is basically light. Like I want to make sure that there is like emanating light from somewhere. That's pretty much like the core of all of my work is light.
As an oil painter myself, is there, how do you make sure your paint isn't too thinned down?
Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. So, like I said, everything's an experiment. I almost feel like a chemist where I'm pouring, you know, the thinner, and then I'm mixing it. And then I've done it so much now that I can tell by the viscosity of the thinner mixed with the oil paint, whether it's going to stay or not, or whether it's going to show up, or whether it's going to dry down, or whether it's going to get lighter, because the thinner is eating the paint. And then I'm putting it on top of another layer of paint. And if it starts eating that layer underneath, as you can see, it's a little more complex than normal. But if you embrace that aspect of it, then you start learning a lot about that process. And then your outcomes end up being what you want. I don't know how to explain that, but I've been doing it for so long that I've embraced it. It also allows you to, if you're like, oh no, that's the wrong hue, that's the wrong color, I could wipe the whole thing off lightly. And then the underpainting is still there. So yeah, there's experimenting. There is room. There is room for error. And a lot of time I don't necessarily think it's an error. I just kind of go with it.
It's just a step that you had to take to achieve the final.
Exactly.
Totally understand. Final question for you. How do you curb yourself from overworking a piece?
That is a hard one. I'd say with these very large paintings, especially the ones that are expressive and I'm like throwing the paint, is very, very easy to overwork and very quickly. So I space out my sessions where I kind of get to a point where I've covered enough and I'm like, okay, I gotta stop. Or if there's a problem area, I'll only work on that area and I won't work on anything else. In this particular painting, I had to make a choice between where the divide is, where the light is emanating from, for the bottom half and the top half. And how was I going to play those two off of each other? Or like, am I going to leave like a hint of this? I don't know. Sometimes it's a feeling that you're like, I should stop and then start another painting and then come back to it like in a week or two to see if there's anything else that I need to add. But yes, it's definitely very easy to go overboard.
For sure.
Especially when you're throwing paint. It's so fun. I mean, everyone should do it.
Hey, you should host a mixer and have some artists and do a workshop of throwing paint. That sounds great. I would join just to get some angst out of people including our beautiful reception.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Do we have any questions for Catherine in the chats?
Yes, we actually do. We have one question that says, do you make your own paint?
No, because I have a 2-year-old and there's enough on my list of stuff I got to do. And actually getting into the studio and making that a priority has been kind of difficult, even with a 2-year-old. But no, I buy like Williamsburg is one of the brands I use, or like Holland. There are also some brands where the specific color they make is the hue that I'm looking for, like a Naples yellow in one particular brand, that I will only buy that color in that brand because the hue that they produce is exactly what I want and other companies can't produce it. So I do buy my oil paint.
Mm-hmm. A convenience, it really matters when you're a mom. So there's kudos to you doing it. You're creating.
Yeah, and I'm number 2 on the way. So
hey. Congratulations.
Congrats. Amazing.
We have a few more questions. I have one here that says, how long do your paintings take to dry? Do you add dryer?
I do not add dryer. And since I'm thinning it out with Gamasol to begin with, it takes about a week to be like a touch dry. Mm-hmm. If I start doing straight from the tube palette knife painting, that stuff takes at least a month to be touch dry. And then it takes about a year to be fully dry. And these thinner, the thinned out paintings, they usually, I'd say maybe a couple of months. It doesn't take as long to get the smell out. So maybe even half the time is still 6 months.
Thank you, Kat. And I just have a few comments. So somebody said that they love the abstractness of your work and that they can't tell whether they're looking at the sky, water, or earth. And we have quite a few people congratulating you and commending you for having a 2-year-old and also being an artist and making all these wonderful pieces. Oh, and we have one more question, I think. Catherine, you mentioned you subtract after throwing the paint. Would you speak a bit about your subtracting and editing process?
So to create texture, especially when you're using very thin layers, like I like to find interesting material that's absorbent and that can create a texture without you really noticing what it is. Paper towels, they're kind of amazing and they create an amazing texture. And so that's how I could use it to absorb, because also, like I said, it's so thin, like watercolor, that it'll absorb relatively well. Or towels tend to take up too much. So there's a play on whether like what's the pattern on the paper towels, and actually like how you hold the paper towel, because you don't want it to make it look like one. So there's a little bit of finessing, but because you don't want to make people think like, oh, that's a paper towel. People think I end up stepping on my paintings because it looks like either like a shoe mark or something, but literally I'm just using paper towels to subtract everything.
Great. Well, I think that covers all the questions for you. Catherine, thank you so much again for sharing your process. And we're going to move on to our third artist, Wendy Robushi. Welcome, Wendy.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here.
Wendy is a mixed media artist that is hyper-focused on repetition as a form of meditation. Wendy, what are the origins of your obsessions?
Well, if you understand the meaning of the word obsession, that would probably take an examination of my entire psyche. Because obsession means intrusive or preoccupying thoughts, right? I mean, we all have these intrusive thoughts, and we're all continuously preoccupied, whether we think we are or not. So, you know, we can be obsessed with a person, place, thing, or event, and then those turn into thoughts. There's many ways to clear the mind, but, you know, I happen to be an extremely visual person. I'm one of those people who always has a picture in my head of what I'm thinking. When I read, I have pictures. So I've just managed to channel those obsessions into visuals, and that just happens to be in the form of repetition.
Great, thank you. That was very succinct and definitely like explains your roots of why you create. What was your initial draw to concentric circle compositions?
So I'm originally a ceramic artist. So as far back as I can remember, I was always drawing, but in high school, I was introduced to the potter's wheel in a really, really big way. We had a great art program at my high school in Connecticut. So I spent the first 8 years of my artistic life throwing on the wheel. And I actually worked as a production potter for a while. But at a certain point, I couldn't express my artistic self on the potter's wheel anymore. I spent a number of years as working on ceramic sculpture. Mm-hmm. But then when I entered graduate school, I continued working in clay for some time, but there was something missing. I don't know what it was. It was just, you know, you just hit that certain point and it's just not working for you anymore. So I started exploring other materials. And I stayed in sculpture, but I began a series of sculptures using wood, wire, and cloth, which was totally away from clay. I left clay entirely. And I began wrapping the wood with wire and strips of cloth around the wood. So there was a lot of repetition there as well. And as with most artists, things evolve and change. And after grad school, I started working with mixed media on two-dimensional pieces. A lot of the change had to do with, you know, what studio I had and the spaces I had. And I just found that I could actually, you know, start to express myself two-dimensionally. And then at some point, I started working in grids using simple forms and words in repetition. So still that repetition, although it's not wrapping now it was words. As far as the circular composition, the concentric circles, you know, I don't know, maybe at some point I went back to my throwing roots, but I started working in that circular form again, first with paint, because my first piece that I have in this show, because this show is 4 pieces of mine. It's sort of a mini retrospective of my my two-dimensional work. So I started working with paint and pencil, and then if you get to the third piece of mine, I'm actually working in paint and cold wax. So I mix cold wax with you know, Dorlands with the oil paint, and actually most of my words here are actually scratched, you know, into the surface. And, you know, I don't know when I started working in the, you know, the paper. I think again, if something wasn't working for me anymore and I needed to move on to something else. And, you know, I started working in the cut paper. So all of my pieces in this are actually individually cut paper. So I hand cut the paper and then I lay them down. So I feel like in the circular form, I feel like I've actually returned back to my roots.
Exactly. I'm so glad I had the ability, or so glad I asked you that question, because I really got to see your evolution of how you were rooted in the ceramic and throwing. And when you said that, I instantly noticed like, oh yes, that is there in her 2D work, and it's amazing. And now you're back to 3D in a way. I mean, it's on a panel, but it's jutting out with a paper sculptural. Right. Just like the piece right behind you. There's that beautiful texture and like almost like scales.
Right.
On your blue piece.
See the side. well, actually you can't, it's too dark. But anyway, you know, yeah, everything's, yeah, I'm actually back to my three-dimensional roots one way or another again, correct?
Yeah, yeah. It looks like a contact lens. That's what I see. So when I think of infinite, I am reminded of how nothing is permanent. What is your interpretation of infinity and how it fits into our reality?
Well, you know, in my mind, all things are impermanent, right? So an artist friend of mine and I often joke, you know, here we are artists who are making all this stuff, when really in the larger scheme of things, we're just adding junk to the world. That's our joke, that we're just adding this stuff. We're really here just for this, you know, minute amount of time, and we're hardly infinite at all, right? So mostly we're just creating the stuff, and if we're lucky, some people like it, maybe nobody will like it, but you know, we keep doing it anyway because this is, you know, this is what we do. So, you know, what's infinity? I don't know. You know, the astronomers have been studying the universe and trying to find, you know, trying to discover if it's infinite, and still none of them know, you know, any more than we do. So it's really like, it's a philosophical question that we could probably talk about for days and still, you know, have no answers.
Thank you. Yeah, that gave me as many answers as it did questions. Do we have any questions for Wendy?
We have one question that I'm not sure if possibly your question might have just answered it. So I will read it and invite the person to clarify. How did you come to find the word infinite? And how do you put that word over and over again? Jeremy, did you want to add anything to your question?
No, I was just looking at it, and I was just like, saw how infinite is, like, you know, like in like a 360 kind of dimension. Like I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I'm just like, how did you do that? Why did you pick that word, and how did you do that? Is basically where I'm coming from.
Well, I'm kind of fascinated with the infinite also. I mean, I'm kind of a minor, you know, astronomy buff. Not that I go out and look, but I love looking at the sky. It's actually, I love Catherine's paintings because they remind me of that night sky, you know, going out and looking for something out there, not knowing what it is actually, you know, who knows what's out there, but that's just, you know, I'm just fascinated with that. And so that's, I think, where that word comes from, is just my fascination with looking up in the sky and, you know, what is that infinity out there? So it's a question I have in my mind over and over again, you know, what is infinity?
Thank you.
Really that simple.
Yeah. Amazing. Any other questions for Wendy?
No questions. I have a few comments. Barbara says, wise words and beautiful work, Wendy. Joanne says, I have always loved Wendy's work, simultaneously so soothing and sublime, gorgeous and inspiring. I cannot look away. And Jason says that they are soothing to gaze upon the texture.
Not always soothing to create, I might add.
Is it a bit of a love-hate relationship?
I think for most artists it is, isn't it? I mean, you know, we do this because we love it. And then on the other hand, sometimes, you know, like I get stuck just like a lot of other artists, you know, get stuck. And then just like, why am I doing this? Why don't I just go out and, I don't know. I worked as a gardener for a while, you know, because we all have to do something else sometimes to support ourselves. And why don't I just go back to gardening? You know, it's just so simple.
I have a funny career choice, and I used to work with dogs at a doggy daycare. So I had that similar, like, okay, dogs are great. They don't talk back,
right?
And they love you when you give them a snack, and you take them for a walk, and they love the fresh air. And so I could relate to you on that. All right, thank you so much, Wendy.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our artists, Pamela, Catherine, and Wendy. Once again, you can enjoy their work from the comfort of your home on our dedicated virtual art gallery. Or you can make a viewing appointment with Sam, the office manager for the office of Supervisor Ahsha Safai in City Hall. They are on summer break at the moment, but they will be back in a couple of weeks, and they will be happy to have art lovers come and view the works in person. So please make a viewing appointment with them. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we could all enjoy each other's company. Please put yourself onto gallery view, and so we can see everyone here. And you may take yourself off mute if you feel brave enough to ask any questions to our featured artists. Please do so now. Or say hi. Hi, everyone.
I think there was one question for me, right, Vanessa?
Yeah, there was one. Thank you, Kat, for reminding me. And it had, let me scroll back up. It had to do with how motherhood may have influenced your work. How has motherhood potentially changed your work, process, or perspective?
I'd say the pandemic is more of a driver than the motherhood part. I think I've always painted worlds, if you would. Like when people see my work, there's like, I don't know that place, but it's like something that's painted out of my subconscious, or just from looking at so many images, and also looking at, you know, Hubble telescope images too. And sunsets and skies, which is the ultimate, I think, inspiration for me. So I don't necessarily think it's changed how I've worked. Maybe more of the letting go of what the outcome would be and being more experimental. I probably would say that, because the times I can't go in so consistently where I feel like I'm getting a rhythm going. So then I just let go of that pressure that I think a lot of artists put on themselves when they go into a studio to like produce something, and just have fun. And you do need that when you have a 2-year-old that's going through the terrible twos, so that you can have some sanity. I'd say the pandemic is like probably more of the bigger driver, where it was like, oh no, I really need to do art, or I'm gonna go crazy. So that was more of the need to make it a priority and get into the studio, so that I had a time to, I think of painting as not thinking. Like it's a time that I'm just like, yeah, clearing the mind and just mixing paint. I mean, mixing paint is so fun. So yeah, I'd say that would be my answer.
Do you get a sense of meditation when you go into the studio?
Yeah, you know, you put on your music, my go-to music, and mine's a lot of Odessa. So it's a lot of ambient music, and that's, yeah, just no one bothering you and just going.
I have a question for all the artists. Outside of actually putting in time into your work, is time a major factor on how you create in regards to letting the piece stay as it is for a bit, or is use time as a medium to help create a part of the image?
Yeah, I mean, I work in spurts. So sometimes I get to a dead end and I have no idea where I'm going to go next. So to be honest, sometimes I stop working for weeks. But I'm not really not working. I'm working, you know, in my head, trying to figure it out. So, you know, I don't subscribe to that workaholic artist mentality that you have to constantly be making, because if I'm stuck, I'm stuck. So I just stop and think, and eventually, you know, an answer comes. Except sometimes on the other hand, if I have a show or commissions coming up, you know, commissions due, then I have to keep working no matter what. And, you know, that can be frustrating because, you know, the illusion is the life of an artist is the happiest of vocations. You know, that's kind of an illusion. You know, we all get bored and tired, and scared, you know, of what we're doing next, just like, you know, the next person in work. But yeah, that time to just step back is really, really important. And I don't mean even going on vacation. I mean mundane things. Okay, so like for the next couple of weeks, I'm just doing, you know, I'm going shopping, from cooking, and, you know, just kind of hanging out. And it's just that, I think that's really, really, I mean, it's important for me to have that time to step away.
And recharge your creative battery.
Yeah, yeah.
And wash the dishes and maybe take a shower.
Right, exactly. Go for walks, go hikes, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I tend to work on multiple things at one time. And so I have always had sort of a parallel practice of working on drawings and then working on three-dimensional work, two-dimensional and three-dimensional. There was a time when my drawings were three-dimensional too, but the two things really do an amazing thing to feed each other, even though they don't refer to the other. And so, like right now, I'm working on some large clay pieces. They're stacked, and I finished a big piece of 512 individual cylinders that are stacked 8 high, 8 by 8 by 8. And I finished that during the pandemic, and I have to say that it was, along with knowing somebody like Jeremy, who I got to talk to many days when I would see him walk down to where he was working for my work, it was a very kind of important thing for me to do when I left work during that time, and I worked a lot. And I think the other thing that it's a language, you know, for me, it's a language, and so, you know, during times when I was working a lot at my job, I would draw every day. I did this series of daily drawings, and then I just would hide them away in an envelope and get them out after I had thought I had put enough in the envelope. I didn't even have a number. And then at a certain point, I took them out to see what was happening there. You know, so I had this history, this trail of that activity, because I mean, I really think that putting a pen or a brush or anything to paper or hands to clay or whatever the material is you're using, it's that sending this activating message to your brain that keeps that part of your thought process, your intuitive process, keeps it very much alive. And it's been that part's been pretty important to me over the years.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd say for myself, time plays a role depending on what it is. So one time I was asked to do a commission, but the style in which she wanted was showing me someone else's style. And so I needed to reconcile, how was I going to produce something that was me, but also going to work with her style as well. So it actually took me a year to find out what it was that I can do to produce a painting that she would love, but that was me. So sometimes, like, that's where time, I would say, worked like I was thinking about it for a very long time. And it is like in the back of your mind. I totally agree with Wendy. I do that as well. And like I said, I'm constantly trying to soak in imagery so that it's all in the back of my head. So that when I get into the studio, it's pulling from that, or looking at other artists that I love, or trying to recognize that me taking a photo of a sunset is me working. That is part of being an artist. I am soaking in as much as I can, and that being in the studio alone is a portion of working. And there are anytime that I'm looking at a texture on a wall, I'm also an architect. So I I look at things in a different way. And so if I'm looking at textures, I'm looking at how that texture is being done. I'm looking at a lot of things. So I would say, like, on a daily basis, I'm feeding myself, my artist self, so that when I do have the times to get into the studio, I can bring those to the forefront and then be able to explore what I can do with like that kind of imagery or whatever experiment I want to try.
Great, thank you. I love it. Karen, did you have a question for us?
I did actually have a question for Pam. She partly answered it, but the first part was, is all of her work transparent, like the Ascent, the two pieces that we saw this evening? But actually in her discussion, she talked about clay. So I think my question would really be, how does she continue with inspiration in different mediums at this point in her work?
Wow, that's kind of a really hard question and an interesting one. One thing I'll say, I just want to focus back on this piece, the stacked clay piece that I finished, and then I'll go back to some earlier forged steel pieces that I did in the 80s and 90s. But so there's a combination in this stacked group of cylinders that is about density, like the density of them being together, but it's impossible to get them flat up next to each other. So there's the second thing that made me want to make this piece was that you could see inside it. And there's something about these drawings, you can see through the drawings, but you can also see into them because you've got a layer on top of another layer. And again, it's this issue of layering things. So the sculpture is starting to do that too. And these fairly big 10-foot forged steel pieces that I did, it was a series of vertical, but welded and forged pieces. And what came to be to me was not only the density, because it's a very dense material, but the impact of the density on the space between the pieces. And somehow all of that is now active in both things that I'm doing. So does that answer it, sort of?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And I understand what you're talking about. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, is anyone else brave enough to ask our artists any specific questions on their work or the process, inspiration? Vanessa, do you want to ask any questions? I know you always have something up your sleeve.
Oh, you put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a question. I was floored by so many of the layers of the process for each artist, like Pam coming in hot with all of this surprising material and mediums that she's incorporating into her work. And I just was floored from the beginning. Kat's beautiful, celestial, ethereal work. And just, it's just like Jason had mentioned, or I think actually it was Shannon. It's like, you don't know if you're looking up, down, in, out, and it's amazing. It's like you're traveling through the ether. And Wendy's work, like anytime I encounter an artist who, I mean, to me, it's patience. I'm like, wow, patience is not one of my virtues. And Wendy, for you, the labor and the process orientation and just how much, I can't imagine doing what you do, doing what any of you do, but like the meticulousness. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not a very patient person. So your work is just.
Okay, well, if anyone else wants to ask a question, do so now. Otherwise, I would love to propose a toast to our amazing artists, Pamela, Catherine, and Wendy, on their work up at Ahsha Safai's office. Cheers to you all. We really appreciate all the work that you do and working with us, and we're happy to present your work and get it out there in the world because you all deserve it. So thank you so much. Cheers.
And to all of you.
I want to just thank you so much for all the energy that you put into it, Nick, and also Sam for his presence. And Vanessa. I mean, really very impressive what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Forward to seeing that show in person.
Yeah, you
Yes,
deserve to
me
see in
too.
person.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, of course.
Bye.